Growing up in Casey Falls, Michigan, I had always taken the town's quiet predictability for granted. Nestled between dense forests and a meandering river, Casey Falls was the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name. Our lives were woven together by familiar routines. Morning greetings at the diner, lazy fishing afternoons down by the river, and evenings filled with the chorus of crickets and the comforting glow of porch lights. It was a place untouched by the haste of the outside world, where time seemed to flow like the gentle waters that cascaded down the falls. My childhood and subsequent years in Casey Falls were filled with a sense of stability that I thought would last forever. Nothing ever seemed to change, and that was the way we all liked it. The air was always rich with the scent of pine. The seasons brought predictable shifts in color and mood, and the people remained steadfast and reliable. It was hard to imagine that anything could ever disrupt the serene existence we all shared. Then, one autumn, the first signs of change began to subtly creep in. It started with small, almost imperceptible things. A shadow where there should be none, a whisper of movement at the edge of vision. Many dismissed these as tricks of the light or the mind, but a few, myself included, felt a shiver of foreboding. The people of Casey Falls, normally so attuned to their environment, found themselves increasingly uneasy, as if on the cusp of understanding something not meant to be understood. The first real disturbance came on a windless October night. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves. I was walking home from my job at the local library, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. As I passed the town square, I noticed something unusual. The statue of our town's founder, Elisha Casey, seemed to be different. It was only a slight alteration, something most wouldn't notice at a glance. The statue's eyes, once sculpted to gaze nobly into the distance, now seemed to follow me with an unsettling intensity. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched, attributing it to exhaustion. But as I walked away, I couldn't help but glance back. The statue appeared unchanged in the dim light, yet the feeling of uneasiness lingered, like an itch just beneath the skin. I quickened my pace, eager to escape the oppressive gaze, but the sense of disquiet followed me all the way home. Over the following weeks, other townsfolk began to report similar experiences. Objects would subtly shift from their usual places, and familiar structures seemed to subtly change overnight. Mrs. Henderson, who lived across the street, swore that her backyard garden was larger than she remembered. Mr. Beck, the owner of the grocery store, claimed he could no longer find the latch to his cellar door, as if the wall itself had absorbed it. Our once unshakable routines were becoming fraught with uncertainties and anomalies. Despite these strange occurrences, life in Casey Falls continued, each day cloaked in an air of normalcy that masked the growing sense of something amiss. We were drawn together in our shared discomfort, yet spoke little of it, as if acknowledging the changes would give them power. Yet the disturbances persisted and began to escalate. One particularly cold November night, a low, resonant hum filled the air. It was an eerie sound, vibrating at a frequency that resonated in the bones, a sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The town gathered in the square, faces pale and eyes wide, as if the very air carried a secret we could not grasp. My heart pounded in my chest, adrenaline mixing with the chill of the night. The hum grew in intensity, and just when it seemed unbearable, it stopped suddenly, leaving an echo of silence more unsettling than the sound itself. In the days that followed, the town's unease grew palpable. Familiar faces, once reassuring, now seemed distant, their eyes haunted. Rumors began to circulate, whispers of an ancient curse, tales of the founder's spirit roaming restless. Some suggested that Casey Falls itself was shifting, that the land beneath us was alive and subtly rearranging itself. These stories, though dismissed in the light of day, took on a more sinister edge as dusk approached. December arrived, bringing with it a heavy snowfall that blanketed the town in a pristine, unsettling silence. It was in this eerie calm that the climax of our strange tale occurred. On the night of the winter solstice, the town gathered for our annual festival, a tradition meant to chase away the dark spirits of the longest night. But this time, it felt as though the darkness was not outside, waiting to be warded off, but inside, seeping into the very fabric of our existence. As we stood around the large bonfire, watching the flames dance and flicker, a sudden wind rose, swirling the snow into ghostly shapes. The air crackled with a strange electricity, and the ground beneath our feet seemed to pulse. I felt a tugging sensation, as if something was trying to pull me away from this world and into another. Around me, others clutched their chests or reached out for each other, eyes wide with confusion and fear. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The wind died down, and the snowfall resumed its gentle descent. But when we looked around, we noticed the impossible. The town itself was different. Streets led to places they hadn't before. Familiar houses stood in unfamiliar positions, and landmarks were shifted or altogether missing. The Casey Falls we knew had changed in a way that defied logic or reason. The town meeting the next day was filled with tension and fear. People spoke in hushed tones, their voices tinged with an edge of hysteria. Some suggested leaving, finding new homes far from whatever malevolent force held sway over Casey Falls. Others insisted on staying, convinced that uprooting their lives would only worsen the situation. But deep down, we all recognized the truth we couldn't articulate. Casey Falls was no longer the place we had known. It had stepped out of time, into a liminal space where past and present coalesced into an ungraspable now. In the weeks and months that followed, the once tight-knit community began to unravel. Families left in search of safety and sanity, their departure marked by the hollow echo of empty houses. Those of us who remained tried to adapt to the new reality, but the sense of disorientation lingered. The town felt like a puzzle with missing pieces, its soul fragmented and adrift. Time, in its peculiar way, continued to march on. Seasons changed, and with them, the landscape of Casey Falls continued its subtle metamorphosis. Trees grew taller, their branches twisting in unusual patterns. The river, once a steady companion, now ran with an unpredictable current, its waters reflecting the shifting sky. And through it all, I remained tethered to the town by an invisible thread of nostalgia and hope. I walked the altered streets, my footsteps echoing in the silence, searching for familiar anchors in a sea of uncertainty. Yet each day, as I ventured deeper into the heart of Casey Falls, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes tracking my every move. The statue of Elisha Casey still stood in the town square, its gaze unyielding, as if guarding the secrets of this haunted place. I often found myself drawn to it, standing before the stone figure as if waiting for an answer that would never come. Its eyes, carved with an artistry that seemed beyond human capability, seemed to hold the weight of ages, the stories of those who had vanished and those who remained. Even now, as I sit on my porch and watch the sun dip below the horizon, I am filled with a sense of lingering fear. The town is quieter than ever, its few remaining residents moving like shadows through streets that no longer belong to them. I am left to ponder the mysteries of Casey Falls, the town that vanished before our eyes yet remains, a ghost of itself. The air is still, a calm that belies the turmoil beneath, and I am left with a feeling of being caught in a dream, one where waking is not an option. I wonder if we are part of some grand design, or merely the victims of a cosmic joke, trapped in a place that defies understanding. In the end, it is the unanswered questions that haunt me the most. Why did Casey Falls change? What force lies beneath the surface, bending reality to its will? And as I turn away from the waning light, I can't help but wonder if one day I too will vanish into the mystery, leaving behind only echoes of a life once lived in the quiet town of Casey Falls.
In the small and unassuming town of Willow Creek, Kansas, days passed with predictable tranquility. Its streets were lined with oak trees whose leaves whispered secrets in the wind, and its people shared a life governed by rhythms as familiar as the sunrise. One could set their watch by the procession of Mrs. Jenkins, who walked her dog at precisely 7 each morning, or by the toll of the church bells that marked the call to Sunday service. This town held on to its traditions fiercely, as if by doing so it could ward off the encroaching chaos of the outside world. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, there lay a story whispered behind closed doors and spoken of only in hushed tones. Divergent words about a past that the townsfolk preferred to forget. It was the tale of Ezra Mortimer, an elderly man whose reputation had been stained by the dark conviction of serial killings. His name had become synonymous with fear, and even after his death a decade earlier, an eerie residue seemed to linger in the shadows of Willow Creek. It was an early autumn morning when the first disturbance settled uneasily over the town. The air was crisp, holding the promise of colder days. I was sitting on my porch, cradling a steaming cup of coffee, when the newspaper landed at my feet with a soft thud. The front page bore typical small-town headlines, council meetings and school fundraisers, but hidden within, towards the bottom, was a headline that would later seem portentous. Grave of Ezra Mortimer, found disturbed. At first, the news seemed like nothing more than a curiosity, perhaps the work of vandals or the macabre interests of local teenagers. But as the hours passed, a pall settled over Willow Creek, a chill that seeped into bones and refused to be shaken off. People spoke of it in whispers, as if saying his name aloud might summon something from the ether. By the next morning, the unease had escalated. The disturbances were no longer confined to the cemetery. Reports spread of fleeting shadows and nighttime whispers, of cold drafts in warm rooms, and of lights flickering inexplicably. The children spoke of an old man seen wandering the periphery of the woods, a shadowy figure whose presence in their vivid imaginations was both terrifying and thrilling. I tried to dismiss these stories as folklore in the making, tales spun by restless minds too eager for adventure in a town that offered little. But as the week wore on, my skepticism was tested. It began with small things, a misplaced book, a door left ajar. My cat, usually indifferent to anything but the promise of food, had taken to staring at the corner of the room, her eyes wide and unblinking. Unease became a tangible entity, stalking the streets of Willow Creek. People began locking their doors earlier, peering through drawn curtains at shadows cast by the moon. With each passing day, the texture of fear became more pronounced, a collective tension that wound the town tighter. The climax came on a night when the wind howled like a living creature, rattling windows and sending leaves skittering across the pavement like dry whispers. I had just settled into bed when I heard it, a soft, insistent tapping at the window. My heart stuttered in my chest, a frantic bird trapped within its cage. Cautiously I approached the window, drawing the curtain aside with trembling fingers. There, etched against the moonlit night, stood the silhouette of a man. His features were obscured, blurred by the glass and darkness, but there was no mistaking the unmistakable air of familiarity. An echo from the past, brought chillingly to life. My breath caught, and I staggered back, the curtain slipping from my grasp. It couldn't be him. Ezra Mortimer was dead. I had attended the funeral, seen the casket lower into the ground, yet the figure outside did not waver, a persistent reality in the face of reason. I stood frozen, caught between disbelief and terror, until a sound broke the spell, a low, mournful howl that seemed to emanate from the depths of the earth itself. When I finally summoned the courage to look again, the figure was gone, leaving only the shiver of leaves and the pale glow of the moon. I spent the remainder of the night wide-eyed and trembling, the darkness alive with imagined sound. Days passed, and though the figure did not return, the fear it induced remained, a specter that haunted my every thought. I wasn't alone in this terror. The entire town seemed ensnared by an invisible net of dread. Children were kept indoors, their laughter silenced. Conversations were stilted, eyes wary and watchful. We were a town under siege, not by any physical force, but by the palpable weight of fear. The sheriff, pragmatic and steady, assured us all that it was nothing more than a series of coincidences, perhaps an elaborate prank, but his words did little to quell the rising tide of anxiety. People spoke of moving away, of seeking solace in the anonymity of larger cities, but their roots were deep, intertwined with the soil and history of Willow Creek. Yet the fear persisted, an unwelcome guest that refused to leave. I found myself drawn to the cemetery one evening, compelled by some nameless force to confront that which haunted my thoughts. The wind was a gentle murmur as I walked among the gravestones, the autumn leaves crunching beneath my feet. I stood before the disturbed grave of Ezra Mortimer, the soil uneven and raw. A strange calm settled over me, a quiet acceptance of the inexplicable. As I turned to leave, a voice, soft and melancholy, seemed to drift on the breeze. A voice I recognized from the depths of memory, echoing with a finality that brought tears to my eyes. The specter of Ezra Mortimer, whether real or imagined, had woven itself into the fabric of our town. His return, unfathomable as it was, became a part of our collective story, a reminder of the past that could not be buried. We learned to live with it, to let the fear ebb and flow with the passing seasons. Willow Creek settled once more into familiar rhythms. But beneath the surface, the memory of that autumn lingered like a shadow. It was a lingering fear, a whisper of the unknown that kept us vigilant, our hearts attuned to the possibility of the surreal. And in those moments when the wind would howl through the trees, I would find myself staring into the night, half expecting to see that silhouette again, a dark echo against the light.
In the quiet, unassuming town of Meadowbrook, whispers of strange happenings had always lingered like a stubborn fog. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where secrets were as palpable as the morning mist rolling off the nearby hills. People went about their daily lives, wrapped in the comforting banality of routine. But there was a part of Meadowbrook that existed in the shadows, where the mundane gave way to the strange. I was a private investigator, contracted to look into a series of disappearances that had plagued several places along the East Coast, the trail of which led me back to this eerie little town. The cases were puzzling, connected by the barest threads, all leading back to Meadowbrook, a trailer park on the outskirts, and a condemned apartment building on the other side of town. Here, normalcy was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the unknown. The trailer park was my first destination. It was a ramshackle collection of faded structures, each one a testament to the harsh passage of time. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dirt roads. There was an unsettling stillness here, like the world was holding its breath. My inquiries began with the residents, who were wary but willing to talk. They spoke of a man named Elias, a drifter who had come through town a few months back. He was charming in a way that made people uneasy. They said he had a knack for being everywhere and nowhere all at once, a ghostly presence that slipped through the cracks of their lids. Elias had vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared, around the same time the disappearances started. As I pieced together the stories, a sense of unease settled over me. It was as if Elias was a phantom, a figment conjured by the collective fears of the community. Yet, his impact was undeniably real. The missing people were last seen talking to him, sharing drinks and laughter under the dim glow of trailer park lights, until they too vanished like wisps of smoke in the night. Determined to find out more, I spent the next day exploring the town. Meadowbrook was picturesque in a way that was almost disconcerting, its beauty marred by the knowledge of what lurked beneath the surface. The townsfolk were tight-lipped, their eyes darting nervously whenever I mentioned Elias or the disappearances. It was clear they knew more than they let on, bound by an unspoken act of silence. The trail led me to the condemned apartment building, its hulking form looming at the edge of town like a sentinel guarding the town's darkest secrets. It was a relic of a bygone era, its windows shattered and its walls crumbling under the weight of neglect. A chill ran down my spine as I approached, the air thick with an otherworldly presence. Inside, the building was a labyrinth of decay, each corridor echoing with the whispers of those who once called it home. I moved cautiously, my footsteps stirring the dust of forgotten memories. As I explored, I stumbled upon a small room, its walls covered in cryptic symbols that seemed to writhe under my gaze. At the center was a makeshift altar, adorned with trinkets and offerings that defied explanation. It was then that I felt it, a presence, watching from the shadows, its gaze unsettling in its intensity. I turned, expecting to find Elias, but the room was empty. The feeling lingered, a weight pressing down on my chest, urging me to leave. I returned to the trailer park, a gnawing sense of dread accompanying me. As night fell, the air grew heavy with anticipation. I sat with a few residents, their faces drawn and weary under the flickering glow of a campfire. They spoke in hushed tones of the dark figure that had taken up residence in Meadowbrook, a being that wasn't truly of this world. They recounted tales of people who had glimpsed something in the corners of their vision, a shadow with eyes like burning coals that seemed to follow them in the dark. Those who had dared to confront it never returned. Elias, they whispered, was but a vessel for something far older, a creature that had slipped through the cracks of reality into their world. As the fire died to embers, I felt the weight of their fear settle over me. I should have left then, but something compelled me to stay. Perhaps it was a professional curiosity, or perhaps it was the growing sense that I was on the verge of uncovering something monumental. The escalation came swiftly, like a storm breaking over the horizon. I received a call from a woman who lived on the outskirts of town, claiming she had seen Elias leading someone into the woods by the trailer park. Her voice trembled with fear, and despite the late hour, I drove out to meet her. The night was pitch black, a canvas upon which only the stars dared to tread. She met me at the edge of the woods, her eyes wide with terror. Together, we ventured into the darkness, guided only by the weak beam of my flashlight. The forest was silent, the kind of silence that roared in your ears and set your heart pounding in your chest. We found them at a clearing, where the trees parted like the teeth of a great beast. Elias stood with his back to us, his figure silhouetted against the pale moonlight. The person he had led into the woods lay motionless at his feet, their fate unknown. I stepped forward, calling out to Elias, demanding answers. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting mine with a knowing glint. There was something inhuman in his gaze, a depth that suggested he was merely a mask for something far darker. Before I could react, the world shifted. The ground beneath me seemed to ripple like water, and the air was filled with a low, resonant hum that vibrated through my bones. My vision swam, and for a moment, I glimpsed something beyond comprehension, an unspeakable form that writhed and twisted, a creature made of shadows and whispers. I stumbled back, the ground solidifying beneath my feet as the apparition vanished. Elias was gone, leaving only the prone figure behind. We hurried to the person's side, relieved to find them breathing, albeit unconscious. The woman and I returned to the trailer park, the encounter etched into our minds, a chilling reminder of the forces at play in Meadowbrook. The townsfolk rallied around us, their faces a mix of gratitude and fear. They spoke of the entity that had claimed Elias, an ancient being that fed on chaos and despair, slipping through the cracks in reality to sow discord. In the days that followed, life in Meadowbrook returned to its uneasy normalcy. The disappearances ceased, and the townsfolk went about their lives with the awareness of the darkness that had brushed against their world. I left the town, my case ostensibly closed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had merely scratched the surface of something far greater. The figure I had glimpsed in the woods haunted my dreams, a specter of fear that lingered on the edges of my consciousness. I thought of Elias, the drifter who had walked between worlds, and the entity that had used him as a conduit to our reality. As I drove away from Meadowbrook, the landscape rolled by in a blur of color and light. But in the shadows cast by the setting sun, I thought I saw a figure standing by the roadside, a man with eyes like burning coals, watching as I passed. The fear stayed with me, a constant companion that whispered of things best left unseen. I knew that somewhere, in the spaces between worlds, the creature awaited, biding its time, ready to slip through the cracks once more. In the end, Meadowbrook was not just a place, it was a passageway, a thin veil between the known and the unknowable, and I was left to wonder when it would next open to let the darkness through. It was a sultry summer afternoon when I found myself driving alone through Yellowstone National Park, the sun casting long shadows through the dense treetops as I navigated the winding road. I had taken a detour from my planned route after a local at a nearby gas station mentioned an old, forgotten town nestled somewhere within the park's expansive reaches. It wasn't on any map I'd seen, and the man had spoken of it with an odd gleam in his eye, as if divulging a well-guarded secret. My curiosity was piqued, and with an entire day ahead of me, I decided to explore. The road narrowed, and soon I was surrounded by towering pines, their needles whispering secrets to one another as the wind passed through them. My phone had lost signal miles back, but I wasn't concerned. Instead, a growing sense of adventure propelled me forward. As the miles slipped away, the forest seemed to grow denser, the path more obscure. The trees stood like ancient sentinels, guarding this hidden realm from the prying eyes of the outside world. Eventually, I stumbled upon a weathered sign half hidden by overgrown foliage. The paint was chipped and faded, but I could just make out the words, "Welcome to Eldergrove." I stopped the car, stepping out to stretch my legs and taking my surroundings. There was an uncanny silence, the kind that hangs heavily in the air and swallows the sound of your own breathing. I felt a peculiar sensation, a tingling at the back of my neck, as if I were being watched. Shaking off the feeling, I walked on. Eldergrove appeared like a relic from another time, unchanged and untouched. The houses were quaint, rustic even, their wooden frames sagging slightly with age. But what struck me most was the absence of life. There wasn't a soul in sight. I wandered down the main street, peering into windows and doorways, only to find dust-covered furniture and cobwebs draping like curtains. Each step I took echoed in the emptiness, amplifying the isolation of the place. As I ventured deeper into the town, unease settled in my stomach. The silence was more than just the absence of sound. It was oppressive, tangible. I paused before a particularly large building that I assumed was a town hall. Its double doors, slightly ajar, seemed to invite me in. Pushing them open, I entered the dim interior. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, and rows of wooden chairs faced an empty stage. Papers were strewn across the floor, the remnants of some long-abandoned meeting. It was then that I noticed the photographs lining the walls. Black and white images of the townsfolk stared back at me, their expressions strangely vacant. They seemed to be looking directly at me, their eyes following wherever I moved. I shivered, my earlier bravado waning slightly. Something about the place felt wrong, as if it existed outside of normal time and space. Determined to unravel the mystery of Eldergrove, I exited the town hall and continued my exploration. It was then I saw them, two men in dark suits standing at the edge of the forest. They were oddly out of place, their formal attire contrasting starkly with the wild surroundings. As I approached, they turned simultaneously to face me. Their faces were remarkably unremarkable, nondescript to the point of being almost forgettable. "Hello," I called out, attempting a casual tone. "Are you from around here?" They did not answer immediately, but instead exchanged an inscrutable glance. "We are here to observe," one finally replied, his voice flat and emotionless. "Observe what?" I asked, my curiosity mounting. "The convergence," the other stated cryptically. I was about to press them for more information when a sudden rustle in the trees drew my attention. When I turned back, the men had vanished, leaving no trace of their presence. A chill crept up my spine. There was something unsettling about their abrupt disappearance, as if they had merely been figments of my imagination. I continued walking, my footsteps now hesitant. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the ghostly town. Despite the growing shadows, I felt compelled to stay, driven by a force I couldn't quite understand. It was as if Eldergrove had spun a web around me, drawing me into its enigmatic heart. As twilight descended, I noticed a soft glow emanating from the depths of the forest. It pulsed gently, like the beating of a heart. Drawn towards it, I followed the path out of town and into the woods. The glow intensified the further I ventured, until I found myself standing before a clearing bathed in ethereal light. In the center of the clearing, people stood in a circle, their faces serene and eyes closed. Recognition flickered in my mind. They were the same faces from the photographs in the town hall. I watched, mesmerized, as they began to sway in unison, their movements slow and rhythmic, like a silent dance. The light seemed to respond to them, growing brighter, enveloping them in its otherworldly embrace. I felt a pull towards the circle, an inexplicable urge to join them. As I stepped forward, a hand gripped my shoulder firmly. Startled, I turned to find one of the suited men standing behind me. "You are not ready," he said, his tone now imbued with a hint of urgency. "This place is not for you." "Who are they?" I demanded, gesturing towards the circle. "They belong here," he replied simply. "And now, so do you, but not yet. You must leave." Conflicted, I hesitated, torn between the allure of the circle and the man's warning. The light was seductive, promising answers to questions I hadn't even formed. But there was an underlying menace, a sense of inevitability that unsettled me. The man's grip tightened, compelling me to step back. "Go," he urged, his voice cutting through the haze of my thoughts. "Before it's too late." Reluctantly, I allowed him to guide me away from the clearing. As we retreated, the light dimmed, swallowed once more by the night. When we reached the edge of the forest, the other suited man was waiting. Together, they turned me towards the path leading back to Eldergrove. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "A place between," one of them answered, a tether to what was and what might be. I nodded, though I understood little. There was a sense of finality in their words, a closure that was at once comforting and disconcerting. As I made my way back to the town, I glanced over my shoulder. The men remained at the forest's edge, watching, ever vigilant. With each step, the oppressive silence of Eldergrove seemed to lift, the weight on my shoulders lessening. But a part of me knew I was leaving something behind, a piece of myself forever tied to this place that didn't belong on any map. I returned to my car, the engine sputtering to life as if hesitant to leave the spectral realm. The road out of Eldergrove stretched interminably ahead, yet as the wheels turned, I found the scenery blurring, the trees merging into one another until I emerged back onto the well-trodden roads of the park. Dusk had given way to night by the time I reached familiar territory, and I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with loss. Eldergrove had retreated into myth, its secrets intact, yet the memory of it lingered like a shadow at the edge of my consciousness. Days turned to weeks, and the encounter began to feel like a half-remembered dream. But every so often, when I was alone and the world fell silent, I would feel the pull of that other place, a gentle tug at the periphery of my thoughts. I would find myself staring into the distance, searching for a flicker of ethereal light or the fleeting presence of suited men in the shadows. Eldergrove had marked me in ways I couldn't fully comprehend, its ghostly echoes a reminder of things beyond understanding. I resumed my travels, visiting places mapped and unknown, but the memory of that town remained, a lingering fear nestled within the recesses of my mind. What existed there between reality and the ephemeral reminded me of the thin veil separating the mundane from the mystical. And though I had escaped, a part of me remained entwined with that hidden town, forever caught in its silent, enigmatic embrace. Owensville, Kentucky, was a town that seemed comfortably nestled in the folds of time. It had the kind of quiet charm that made it both forgettable and unforgettable at once. The kind where people waved at strangers just because, and the air always carried a faint scent of corn and hay. This is where I found myself, a seemingly innocuous stop on my cross-country road trip, where I was seeking moments of clarity and solace. I arrived in Owensville on a balmy afternoon, the sun casting long, lazy shadows over the modest buildings and wide streets. My plan was simple: spend the night at the local bed and breakfast, explore a bit in the morning, and then continue my journey. Little did I know, this town would offer more than just a brief respite. The bed and breakfast was a charming old house, run by an elderly couple, the Johnsons, who seemed to have as many stories as the creaky floorboards beneath their feet. After checking in, I spent my first evening in the sitting room, listening to Mr. Johnson recount tales of the town's history. Each story was laced with a hint of pride and nostalgia, perfectly fitting the atmosphere of this small-town tapestry. With morning came a cool breeze and the promise of adventure. After breakfasting on homemade biscuits and gravy, I decided to explore the outskirts. The locals had mentioned a peculiar spot just outside town limits, a place they referred to cryptically as the Target. Intrigued by their hushed tones and the mystery it seemed to harbor, I set off on foot, armed with nothing more than my curiosity and a map that seemed more of a loose suggestion than a guide. The path to the Target was winding and overgrown, as if nature itself had decided to keep it hidden. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Birds fell silent as I approached, and the wind carried whispers that seemed to dance just out of earshot. Shrugging off the eerie sensations, I pressed on, my shoes crunching rhythmically on the gravel path. Eventually, I reached a clearing, a wide open space surrounded by dense forest. In the center stood a curious formation of stones, arranged in an almost perfect circle, eerily reminiscent of a target from above. The air here was different, heavier, as if charged with static. I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to step into the center of the circle, drawn by an invisible force that seemed both welcoming and foreboding. As I crossed into the circle, the world around me seemed to shift. The vibrant colors of the trees dulled, the air thickened, and an oppressive silence enveloped me. I was no longer in the world I knew. Instead, I found myself in a place that felt like an echo of reality, an alternate version of the familiar. I turned to leave, to retrace my steps back to the path, but the way was no longer there. The forest had changed, closing in like a living entity that had decided to swallow me whole. Panic fluttered in my chest like a bird desperate to escape its cage. I tried to calm myself, to think rationally. I was not one to succumb easily to fear, but this place, this reality, seemed intent on unraveling the very fabric of my being. Time lost all meaning as I wandered the twisted labyrinth of trees. Hours felt like days, and the creeping dread gnawed at my sanity. At times, I would catch glimpses of movement in the periphery, shadows that danced just beyond my vision, teasing me with the promise of companionship in my solitude. The thought that this place might be alive, aware of my presence, was a seed of terror that only grew with each passing moment. I eventually stumbled upon a clearing, different from the one I had entered, but no less unsettling. In the center stood an old, gnarled tree, its branches barren and twisted like skeletal arms reaching for salvation. Carved into its trunk were symbols I could not decipher, but their presence filled me with a profound sense of unease. I knew that whatever forces governed this place, they were beyond my comprehension. Desperation drove me to touch the tree, hoping for a sign, a clue, anything that might guide me back to the world I knew. As my fingers brushed the rough bark, I felt a surge of energy, a connection that coursed through me like an electric current. Images flashed before my eyes, visions of others who had stood where I stood, lost in the same alternate reality, their faces etched with despair. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. I found myself back in the first clearing, standing at the center of the circle of stones. The air was lighter, the colors vibrant once more. The path lay open before me, a welcome sight amidst the chaos I had endured. Shaken but resolute, I hurried away from the target, the urge to leave this place overwhelming. The journey back to the bed and breakfast felt surreal, my mind grappling with the reality of what I had experienced. Each step was a reminder of the thin veil separating our world from the unfathomable. As I reached the familiar streets of Owingsville, the weight of my ordeal began to lift, replaced by a lingering question: what had I truly encountered? That evening, as I recounted my experience to the Johnsons, their reaction was not one of disbelief, but of understanding. They spoke of the target with reverence, acknowledging its existence as a place where the veil between worlds thinned. It was a reminder, they said, of the mysteries that lay hidden in the mundane, always there, waiting for those who dared to venture too close. As I lay in bed that night, sleep was elusive. My mind replayed the events of the day, each detail vivid and haunting. The darkness around me seemed to pulse with the memory of the alternate reality, a place that promised both discovery and despair in equal measure. I knew that I had escaped, but the experience had left an indelible mark, a lingering fear that whispered of things unseen and unknown. When morning finally came, I was eager to leave Owingsville, my heart yearning for the familiar comfort of the open road. As I drove away, the town receded in my rearview mirror, a quaint memory in the tapestry of life. Yet, the enigma of the target remained with me, a haunting echo of an experience that blurred the line between reality and the supernatural. In the days that followed, I often found myself reflecting on my time in Owingsville. The experience had changed me, awakened a curiosity about the unknown that I couldn't quite shake. Each night, as I lay in the safety of my own home, I would feel the pull of the target, a siren call that beckoned me back to its depths. But the fear lingered too, woven into the fabric of my thoughts, a reminder of how fragile our grasp on reality truly is. I understood now that some mysteries were best left unexplored, that some doors, once open, could never be closed. And yet, amidst the fear, there was also a sense of wonder, a recognition of the infinite possibilities that lay beyond our understanding. As I continued my journey through life, the memories of that day in Owingsville became a part of me, a shadow that followed me silently, always present, but never overbearing. It was a reminder of the delicate balance between the known and the unknown, a testament to the thin line that separates our world from the mysteries that lie beyond.
On a warm summer's afternoon, the Ozark Mountains were resplendent with lush greenery, their peaks brushing against a cerulean sky. Driving through the winding roads that coiled like serpents around the hills, I felt a sense of peace, a rare moment of tranquility that seemed to wrap itself around the interior of my car like a soft blanket. The tires hummed a rhythmic lullaby against the asphalt, and the air, scented with pine and earth, rushed in through the slightly cracked windows. I was on my way to a secluded cabin nestled deep within this formidable landscape, a perfect retreat away from the cacophony of urban life. The cabin belonged to my late uncle, a man of peculiar habits and a penchant for solitude. His passing had left the cabin in my care, and I was eager to explore the place, to sift through his belongings, and perhaps understand the enigma that was my uncle. It was said he kept meticulous notes on local folklore and the supernatural, subjects that had always fascinated him. The roads were nearly deserted, as if the world had forgotten this corner of the earth. I passed the occasional farmstead, each set back from the road, cloaked in the shade of sprawling trees. The radio, usually a constant companion, now hummed with static. I fiddled with the dial in a half-hearted attempt to find a station, but the airwaves seemed curiously empty. It was as I rounded a particularly sharp bend that the static cleared, replaced by a clear, even-toned voice. This is a warning to all travelers. Beware the roads of the Ozarks after sundown. Strange occurrences have been reported. Heed the rules of the road. The broadcast crackled back into static as suddenly as it had appeared. I frowned, both puzzled and amused. It sounded like the opening to a ghost story, a local radio station's attempt at setting a mysterious, eerie atmosphere. Yet, I couldn't shake a slight unease that crept up my spine. Shaking my head, I turned the radio off, dismissing the message as an elaborate prank. The sun was still high in the sky, casting long shadows that danced across the road. I focused on the drive, the thrill of the adventure beginning to eclipse the strange broadcast. The first indication that things were not as they seemed came just after I passed a small, neglected sign, pointing towards a dirt track leading deeper into the mountains. A figure stood by the side of the road, cloaked in a dusty coat, a wide-brimmed hat obscuring their features. They raised a hand, flagging me down. Instinctively, I slowed the car, curiosity piqued. As I drew nearer, the figure seemed to dissolve, like smoke in the wind, until there was nothing but air and the faint rustle of leaves. My heart skipped a beat. I blinked rapidly, eyes flicking between the road and my rearview mirror. No one. The road behind me was empty. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the afternoon, a tingling apprehension that settled in the pit of my stomach. It was then I remembered the broadcast, the warning resonating ominously in the recesses of my mind. Dismissing it as a trick of the light, I pressed on. The cabin wasn't far now, and I was eager to arrive before dusk. The road twisted and turned, each bend revealing new vistas, the shadows growing longer as the sun began its descent. As I finally neared the cabin, the air seemed to thicken, the atmosphere charged with an inexplicable weight. The structure emerged from the trees, a quaint wooden building with a sloping roof and a porch that beckoned invitingly. I parked the car and stepped out, stretching my limbs and taking a deep breath of the clean mountain air. The cabin's interior was as I remembered it from previous visits, cozy, slightly musty, with wood-paneled walls lined with bookshelves. I ran a finger over the spines, noting the eclectic collection of literature, history, and folklore. My uncle's study was cluttered with papers and notebooks filled with his neat, spidery handwriting. I settled into an armchair with one of his notebooks, the pages brittle with age. My eyes drifted over his entries on local legends, tales of ghostly apparitions, and mysterious disappearances. One entry caught my eye, a passage about the roads, eerily similar to the broadcast I had heard. It detailed rules to follow when traveling these paths. Never pick up hitchhikers, never stop unless necessary, and always arrive at your destination before nightfall. A shiver coursed through me, a whisper of dread that brushed against my consciousness. It seemed absurd, like a ghost story meant to thrill and terrify. Yet the memory of the vanishing figure lingered at the edge of my mind, a puzzle piece that refused to fit neatly into place. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the cabin was swallowed by darkness. I busied myself with preparing a meal, trying to shake off the unease that clung to me like a shadow. Outside, the nocturnal symphony of cicadas and distant owl calls filled the air, a chorus that was both comforting and eerie. After dinner, I retired to the small bedroom. Sleep came fitfully, my dreams a tumult of distorted images and half-heard whispers. When I awoke, the first light of dawn had begun to filter through the curtains, painting the room in hues of gold and rose. The day passed uneventfully, filled with the simple tasks of cleaning and organizing my uncle's belongings, yet a part of me remained vigilant, attuned to the slightest disturbance. As dusk approached, a low fog began to roll in, casting the world in a gauzy shroud. That evening, as I sat on the porch, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, I heard it again. The radio broadcast. Without the radio, the voice drifted on the wind clearer than before. Beware the roads of the Ozarks after sundown. Strange occurrences have been reported. Heed the rules of the Ozarks after sundown. Strange occurrences have been reported. Heed the rules of the Ozarks after sundown. Strange occurrences have been reported. Heed the rules of the Ozarks after sundown. Strange occurrences have been reported. Heed the rules of the Ozarks after sundown. Strange occurrences have been reported. Heed the rules of the... I stood abruptly, my heart racing, eyes scanning the forest. The trees stood silent, their branches swaying slightly in the breeze. Deciding that a walk might clear my head, I grabbed a flashlight and ventured down the path that wound through the woods. The beam cut through the fog like a knife, illuminating the path ahead in stark relief. I walked slowly, the gravel crunching beneath my feet. The forest was alive with sounds. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of a fox, the flutter of wings. Yet it felt as if the world was holding its breath, the air taut with anticipation. I walked further, the path familiar and yet somehow altered, the shadows deeper, the silence louder. It was then that I saw him again, the figure from the road, standing at the edge of the path, his hat pulled low, a hand raised in silent greeting or warning. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I considered turning back, but something compelled me to continue, to approach. As I drew closer, the figure remained motionless, an unnerving stillness that seemed to defy the natural order. "Who are you?" I called, my voice sounding small and hollow. The figure tilted its head slightly, the head obscuring its face, and then, just like before, it vanished. One moment it was there, solid and real, and the next it was gone, leaving behind only the whisper of a breeze and the faint smell of smoke. My heart pounded, my skin prickling with unease. I turned back, the flashlight beam jittering as my hand trembled. The path seemed longer on the return, each step echoing in the stillness. When I finally reached the cabin, I bolted the door behind me, the solid weight of it reassuring. Sleep eluded me that night, my mind racing with questions and doubts. By morning, I had resolved to leave, the curiosity that had drawn me here overshadowed by the growing sense of dread. I packed my belongings swiftly, eager to return to the familiarity of the city. As I drove away from the cabin, the road stretched out before me, winding through the landscape like an endless ribbon. The sun rose higher, casting the world in a warm glow, yet the memory of the figure lingered, a shadow that refused to dissipate. The radio remained silent, a rare indulgence as I navigated the curves and bends. I kept an eye on the road, half expecting the figure to reappear. But the way remained clear, the only sign of life the occasional bird or small animal darting across the asphalt. It was as I reached the outskirts of the mountains that the radio crackled to life once more. The same voice, the same message, repeating like a mantra. Beware the roads of the Ozarks after sundown. Strange occurrences have been reported. Heed the rules of the road. This time I listened, the words resonating with a newfound clarity. The figure, the vanishing act, the eerie broadcast. It was all connected, a tapestry of events woven into the fabric of these mountains. I couldn't help but wonder if my uncle had known, if his obsession with the supernatural was driven by more than mere curiosity. As I crossed the state line, leaving the Ozarks behind, a sense of relief washed over me, mingled with the lingering fear of the unknown. The road stretched on, the city drawing closer with each passing mile, yet the memory of the mountains clung to me, an enigma unsolved. I knew I would return one day, drawn back by the allure of the mystery, the pull of the unknown. But for now, I drove on, the rules of the road etched into my mind, a silent reminder of the strange occurrences that lay hidden in the folds of the Ozarks. The desert landscape surrounding Phoenix, Arizona, is a vast expanse of sun-bleached earth and resilient flora. To the untrained eye, it is a barren wasteland, but to those who call it home, it is a vibrant tapestry of life and mystery. I had always been fascinated by the peculiarities of this arid land, a passion nurtured by my late-night drives through its winding roads. There was a freedom in the open stretches of highway that calmed my restless mind, a balm for the monotony of everyday life. But this was before I stumbled upon the left/right game, a simple sequence of turns that promised to lead the adventurous to places unknown. It was a regular Tuesday evening in early June when I first encountered the legend. A friend had mentioned it in passing, an urban myth circulating among the local thrill seekers and conspiracy theorists. The rules were deceptively simple. Start driving, and at every intersection, turn left, right, repeatedly. The pattern would eventually take you somewhere unexpected, somewhere otherworldly. Of course, I dismissed it as nonsense, an entertaining campfire story at best. But later that night, as the moon cast an ethereal glow over the silent streets, the allure of the unknown beckoned me. Curiosity got the better of me, and just after midnight I found myself behind the wheel, the hum of the engine punctuating the quiet desert air. The city lights receded in the rearview mirror as I embarked on my spontaneous journey. I began the sequence, left, right. The roads were familiar at first, leading me through suburban neighborhoods and past closed storefronts. It was a comfort, this sense of normalcy, a reassurance that despite my unconventional escapade, I was still tethered to reality. But then, something changed. The houses became sparse, the streets narrower, and the air thicker with uncertainty. I glanced at the dashboard clock as it flickered unexpectedly, the digital numbers glitching momentarily before correcting themselves. It was the first sign that something was amiss, a subtle distortion that set my nerves on edge. I shook it off as a technical glitch, an anomaly easily explained away by the wear and tear of my old car. Yet, doubt crept in as I continued driving, the pattern unwavering, left, right. The landscape began to shift in subtle increments. The moon cast strange shadows on the road, elongating and twisting them in unnatural ways. A chill ran down my spine despite the oppressive summer heat. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles pale under the dim glow of the dashboard. I passed a dilapidated gas station, its windows dark and foreboding. It wasn't the first time I had seen deserted buildings on my drives, but this one seemed different. There was an aura of neglect that went beyond mere abandonment. A sense of being watched by unseen eyes. I felt the weight of their gaze as I drove past, a phantom presence that lingered long after the building had vanished from sight. The road began to descend into unfamiliar territory, leading me away from the city into the heart of the desert. The terrain here was rugged and untamed. The asphalt cracked and uneven. I hesitated at the next intersection, my hand faltering on the steering wheel. This was all part of the game, I reminded myself. To doubt now would be to admit defeat. With a deep breath, I made the turn, continuing the sequence that had brought me so far. The disturbances grew more pronounced as I delved deeper into the unknown. The radio crackled to life without warning, an incoherent jumble of static and distant voices. I reached to turn it off, my fingers brushing the volume knob, just as it fell silent again. I shivered, the temperature inside the car dropping inexplicably. What was once an innocent adventure now felt like a descent into madness, the boundaries of reality blurring with each passing mile. I lost track of time as I drove, the dashboard clock flickering erratically, refusing to settle on a definitive hour. The world outside the windshield seemed to warp, the desert landscape shifting like a mirage under the relentless moonlight. I felt the pull of the unknown, a compulsion that defied logic and reason. But as I glanced at the sky, I realized the moon was no longer my guide. It hung there, larger and brighter than I had ever seen, transforming the night into a surreal canvas. The climax of my journey came when the road abruptly ended at a chain-link fence, adorned with faded warning signs and rusted barbed wire. Beyond it lay an expanse of desert, untouched and eternal. I stopped the car, the engine idling softly as I took in the sight. There was something inherently wrong about this place, a feeling that I had crossed a threshold into a realm where the rules of nature no longer applied. I stepped out of the car, the soles of my shoes crunching on the gravel. The air was eerily still, devoid of the usual nocturnal sounds. I approached the fence cautiously, my heart pounding against my ribs. I could feel it, a presence beyond the veil of reality, a whisper on the edge of my consciousness. It was then that I noticed the footprints in the sand, leading away from the fence into the darkness. They were not mine. They were too large, too distinct. I followed them with my eyes until they disappeared into the night, swallowed by the shadows. Fear gripped me, a primal instinct urging me to flee. But as I turned back to my car, I saw it differently. It was no longer the familiar vehicle I had driven for years, but a ghostly version of itself, shimmering under the moonlight. I hesitated, my resolve crumbling under the weight of the inexplicable. I was trapped in this liminal space, caught between the familiar and the unknown. In a moment of clarity, I knew I had to leave. I climbed back into the driver's seat, the car's interior cold and unwelcoming. I reversed carefully, the tires crunching on the gravel as I retraced my path. The drive back felt longer, the turns more disorienting. I kept to the sequence, left, right, hoping it would lead me back to safety. Finally, the familiar outlines of the city emerged from the darkness, the streetlights a beacon of normalcy. I took a deep breath as I pulled into my driveway, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. I sat there for a moment, the silence of the night pressing in around me. I had returned, but a part of me still lingered on that nameless road, haunted by the mysteries it concealed. In the days that followed, the memories of that night haunted me like a phantom presence. I avoided the subject with friends, dismissing their questions with vague shrugs and forced smiles. But the truth was, I could not shake the feeling that something had followed me back, a shadow lurking in the periphery of my vision. It manifested in small ways: the flicker of lights, the static on the radio, the feeling of being watched. I had glimpsed a world beyond my own, and it had left its mark on my soul. I often find myself staring out at the desert from my window, the endless horizon, both a comfort and a reminder of the unknown. The left/right game has become more than a mere urban legend to me. It is a symbol of the thin veil that separates our reality from the other. I am both drawn to and repelled by it, the allure of the unknown tempered by the fear of what lies beyond. In the stillness of the night, when the world is hushed and the shadows stretch long and deep, I sometimes hear it, the faint echo of footsteps in the sand, leading away from the fence and into the darkness. I do not follow them anymore. Perhaps one day, when the courage returns, I will venture out again. But for now, I remain tethered to the light, the specter of that nameless road, a constant companion in the quiet moments of reflection. The desert holds its secrets close, and I am both a part of and apart from its eternal mystery.